Well, hello, and welcome to this session here. My name is Jonah Knight, and this is a conversation about Brindlewood Bay. I'm the one who wrote the upcoming campaign. At I don't have announcements. At one point, there were dates and schedules, and then tariffs and stuff, and everything got moved around. So I don't have like a release announcement or anything like that. But the big chunk of writing that I turned in is with editorial, and it is up to them. So I will find out some other time when it's ready to go. But I thought I would just start off by telling you a little bit about me and how I approach this, and then I'm going to talk about some big ideas and like what I really wanted to be in this campaign. And at any point, any of you can stick a question in chat. If there's something, if there's a big question, you can always like stop me and say, "Hey, can you expand on that?" or something. But I did not try to time this for the full 2 hours, so it will go until you're done listening to me, I think. So yeah, I guess a little bit about me and creative stuff, and this will be a short-ish section. But I'm a playwright. I was the artistic director for a theater company for a few years. I was a touring singer-songwriter where I wrote primarily music about ghosts and monsters and steampunk. And then I was in pro wrestling. I went to the Supreme Pro Wrestling Training Academy and worked as a referee and a manager under a lucha mask for about 4 years. And I did all that before I started writing role-playing games. So I come to it with all of these influences about how to convey character and tell story. And I also do the actual play podcast Roll to Meddle, which is on which is a Brindlewood Bay campaign and is currently on a hiatus because, like everybody else, we started during the pandemic when everybody had all the time in the world, and now we don't. But we have recorded a lot of stuff that hasn't been released yet, and it will be there. So I think that's probably good for me. Yeah. Oh, and I published three collections on Drive Through RPG called The Unofficial Brindlewood Bay Mysteries, which is 10 mysteries that were written by other authors, and then 5 that were from the podcast that I wrote. So that is my Brindlewood Bay connection there. So a little right when the Brindlewood Bay Kickstarter was going, it was funded super fast and got it was very successful. And when everybody sort of saw that Jason was running low on stretch goals, I think a lot of people started to pitch him, "Oh, maybe you could do this or this." So I pitched, "Hey, I could write a full campaign in a different sort of style than the one that is with the game now." And he said, "That's a good idea. Do you have some ideas?" I gave him some quick ideas. He said, "Great, we'll do more with that after the campaign." And then he put it in and it got funded, and then we had to figure out what to do. So we had an official meeting where I came into it with 3 big concepts for what the next campaign could be. And we did the full, I think what everyone kind of assumes the pitching is. I gave a document, I talked through the ideas, and then he said, "I like this one, let's do this one." So that is what we've got. And so what is written and what will come out at some point is what we've been calling Brindlewood Bay miniseries. So instead of it being, it's still television-ish based, but could we do this and tell like a real story arc with the with full supernatural issues and the midwives up to some shenanigans and all that kind of stuff? And could we do that effectively with just a few mysteries instead of with the expanse of the way the campaign was, the first campaign was. And so what we came up with was this idea of, can we connect 3 to 5 mysteries and build in an arc? And at this point, Jason had already put out a bunch of other games. So we started looking at some of the influences for how he was building seasons in, or story arcs in some of the other games, and took influences from that and brought it over in structuring this. So the idea is that with this, I've been calling it a year in the life, but that's probably not going to be what it is when it's released. That's just sort of what I've been thinking of it as. So there are 4 seasons, and there are 4 structures. So you have your spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And as the players, you can choose to play any of them as a standalone story, or you can string them all together. And in addition to there being a plot over summer, there's also a year-long story plot that the midwives are up to, and you can do that. So we wanted to do this sort of like, can we break it down into a small bit? And can you also expand it so if someone really wants to do the whole thing, they can do the whole thing? So, that was sort of the big structuring idea about how to do that. And then we went through a couple of iterations of that, because I think my first pitch was that each season would have 5 new mysteries. And if you play, and you could choose, if you want, to stick any of the existing mysteries in between parts 1 and 2. If you really want to expand spring and blow it up to a whole campaign, you could. And then that kind of sounded great at the time, but you do the math on that and you realize how many mysteries you're juggling in your head at the same time. And that became a little unwieldy, and it eventually reduced down. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit there. But I approached it not only wanting to do that structural thing, but I also had sort of personal goals that I brought to it, because I live in Massachusetts. And one of the things for me was that the original writing maybe didn't feel like New England as much as it could. So in the back of my mind, it was like, how can I really get a lot of local flavor into this? How can I really make the location essential? And so things like at the beginning of each season, there's a set the scene section just for this season in New England. So as the GM, you can take a look at that and just sort of file these things away. This is how hot it's going to be. This is how cold it's going to be. Does that matter to locals? In summer, assuming that there was going to be tourism, I mentioned like, hey, in Massachusetts, there is a law that says if you don't yield to a pedestrian, you get a $250 ticket. That doesn't cue into anything, but it's like a nice little factoid for a GM to file away, I think. So I wanted to do some of those things. And then I wanted to make the mysteries in each season matter, so that whatever is happening in summer couldn't happen in winter. And so what are these mysteries that are so based on season? And it's so something like, this is a great opportunity to have a murder at a sandcastle competition kind of thing. And that was one of the ones that I struggled with and eventually didn't do it. I couldn't make that one work, but that was the idea. It was like, it's not just summer. It's not just describing the heat and humidity. How do the mysteries define themselves by the time of year that they're in? And that was a fun challenge for me as well. So running into the idea of summer camps and running into the idea of spring weather, and what are some issues locally that I could sort of feed into this as local flavor, but also as something that someone could maybe use as motivation for murder. Like, people really care about wind farms around here, so what can I do with a wind farm? And that kind of thing. So that was important. It was also important to me, and I think this really comes from my time as a playwright and the way that I like to do actual plays. I emphasize player agency. So I wanted to have something that the Mavens are up to in every season that is just like, this is their life. This is what's going on in their lives, and you can decide to really lean into it or back off from it. So something like help spread the word about the new Gold Crown mystery book that's coming out, and help the bookstore out. And that's just sort of in the background, and it gives you kind of an excuse to start talking to people. Hey, you're helping the town of Brindlewood Bay put on the April Fool's Day festival. It's not going to overwhelm solving the mysteries, but it kind of gives a glimpse into their lives, so that you know that they're real people. They're as real, giving opportunities for players to really make vibrant characters that can spend a lot of time just talking about who they are, if that's the kind of game you want to run, if you really want to get into that. So that was important to me, to sort of round out the world with options, and walking that line between what do I want to require here, but also what do I want to sprinkle in case your group really likes this kind of play? What can be there for that? So I really liked all of that kind of stuff. There is a quote from David Mamet, who's a playwright, and he's worked on TV and film and all that kind of thing. And he's pretty smart about writing. And he said this thing a while ago that I've kept around, and it influences me in the way that I think about writing. And when I started writing RPGs, this was also there. And he basically was talking to a staff of writers that were on a TV show that wasn't working. And he said that each scene needs to do three things. We have to explain three things to the audience. It has to be clear to the audience, these three things. The first is who wants what in this scene. And so if we translate that to role-playing games, hopefully the players are pursuing their goals, but we have to remember that the NPCs also have their goals. And if you walk into a scene and all the NPCs are just there waiting to be talked to, that's maybe less dynamic than giving them something to pursue as passionately as a player would want to pursue it. So who wants what? Question 2, what happens if they don't get it? So if you have an NPC who really wants to convince a player to do something and the player is not convinced, will the NPC behave differently? And just sort of feeding that in, giving those possibilities. And the third one was important, and it sort of informed a lot of this. And the third question that David Mamet asked was, why now? Why is this scene happening now? It could be earlier, it could be later. Why is it now? Maybe it doesn't even need to be here at all. And some of that is sort of GM focused for our storytelling. But some of it is also, it fed into like, why is this mystery happening in the summer and not the winter? Why does this mystery matter in the context of a campaign? And so when I started making my notes about all of the possible mysteries that could go into any given season, when I kept asking myself, why is it this and why is it now? A lot of them just didn't hold up. So I have a lot of them that I still like, but when I kept asking myself, why does it have to happen now? I couldn't justify them for any of these seasons or this campaign in particular. So, as an example, there's one that I really like that is set at the Brindlewood Bay Community College, and it's a murder in the anthropology department. And it was in the summer, so the students are mostly gone, but the faculty and staff is still there. And you're like, okay, I see how this is going. It's anthropology. There's some weird stuff. It's in a campus. We could explore this new location. There are a lot of options here. But as I kept digging into what the themes were for summer, I couldn't justify that mystery as being more important than some of the others. So it ended up in my cut this and figure it out later folder. So hopefully, and because it started with trying to come up with so many mysteries at the same time. So I would start with a season and say like, well, what are the mysteries that could go into spring? What's the overall plot that the midwives are up to in spring? And then it's like, well, then this doesn't quite match the tone. And this mystery might match the tone. And so there was moving things around. And that was a pretty effective way to do it, because the big picture there, you know, realizing at the beginning when I signed up to write, when I pitched writing all of these mysteries at the same time, I didn't realize what that meant, because with the 4 seasons and 5 new mysteries per season, I have pages and pages of clues. I have pages and pages of locations. And when you're doing that, and when you're trying to make them all matter and important at the same time, you can see your own patterns as a writer. It's like, these 20 clues are very much like all the other 20 clues, and that's not good enough. And then you sort of get stuck into the suspects and wanting to create very different personalities and very different characters that are easy for the GM to portray. But when you're trying to do 20 mysteries of suspects all at the same time, you end up trying things that don't work. And so it was really a good move to sort of reduce that from 5 new mysteries per season. There are 3 plus interstitials now. And this is all still going through editorial. So what it ultimately looks like when it gets to you, I can't say. But right now there are these constructs that hold each season together, and the mysteries within them are really help to tell the story of what the midwives are up to in that season. And so that was actually really neat. So I kind of wanted to tell you about a couple of things that I tried that didn't work, because I think this is fun. And I think that as writers, I assume most of us here are writers. It's maybe good to sort of like, it's fun to hear about writing ideas that didn't pan out at the end, and maybe why I think that's the case. So the big one for me was in autumn. I wanted it to revolve around a cranberry bog, because this is New England. We got cranberries, we got swamps. It's a completely bizarre location for the rest of the world. We don't really know what cranberry bogs are. And I was into this idea to such an extent that I went and did an actual guided tour of a cranberry farm and spent about 2 hours, had to drive 90 minutes to get to the bog, and then spent 2 hours there, got the giant boots on and waded out into the cranberries and threw them up in the air and took pictures and learned so much about cranberry bogs, and ultimately couldn't make it work. I couldn't make the cranberry bog mystery work. And that was a real struggle, because I actually went to the place and I did that research that writers talk about sometimes. And I have so much cranberry bog trivia that didn't make it into a mystery. For example, sheep are great animals to have around a cranberry bog because they eat all the weeds, they eat poison ivy, they eat ivy, they hate cranberries. They will not eat the crop, but they'll eat all the other junk that gets in the way of the crop. So where we went, it was also a sheep rescue farm. So they rescue the old sheep and just let them wander around and eat all the weeds. Like, fantastic. Didn't work for the mystery. So that was a good one. I like that. In trying to struggle through coming up with unique characters, unique suspects for 5, 10, 15, 20, 20, 20, 25 mysteries all at the same time, I tried a couple of things that also didn't quite land for me. I started with like, can this cast of suspects also be the cast of Community? Can I use the cast of Twin Peaks and start with that as my suspects? And every time I took like the cast of a TV show and tried to do a direct translation, even though I saw the characters a lot more clearly from the beginning, that ultimately also didn't work for me. So right now there is a mystery, and we'll see if there's much tweaking there. But the one that started with the cast of Community and like trying to turn them into suspects. The core of them is kind of there, but the further away I went from the way that they were on TV, the more it worked. So at this point, when you get it, you may not even notice. You may not notice, Britta and Abed and Jeff and all that. You may not know. And so I think like that was a kind of a surprise, because I thought like, oh, wouldn't it be fun if just like, I like Twin Peaks. What if just I throw a bunch of Twin Peaks here? And I guess it kind of worked to begin, but I had to leave that very quickly. Like the closer I tried to stick with those characters, the less it worked for me. And it just kind of it didn't feel good. And I cut a couple of those as well. And I think it was because I just started with weird suspects that just didn't mesh. I have a mystery that is one player, one GM. I wrote like the one-on-one mystery and thought this is going to be great because this is kind of horror. And the idea was like, as soon as one of the Mavens gets an injury, she wakes up in the hospital. She's got a fractured hip or something. And the mystery is what's going on in the hospital. A little Hitchcock, a little Rear Window, and that kind of thing. Again, I think there's a lot of potential for a couple of mysteries that are one player, one GM. But that one didn't work in this. And I think the idea is good. I think it's very suspenseful, but it didn't work for this. So it was one of those that like, there's some ideas here I really like. It's not going to work. And this process for me, because it started so big, there were a lot of those things. There were a lot of those things that I just had to keep pulling out. And I think ultimately that led to the final result being a lot tighter, because there were a lot of mysteries that were like, there's like a couple things here that I really like, but all in all, it's not coming together. Well, I cut it. Take it out. Get the one that works. Get the one that works from beginning to end, and not just the ones that have some good ideas. So that was sort of how ideas on that. It was a very cool process to do that, because I turned in drafts that were super expansive, and you could sort of see like they were drafts that were at a point where you could see the potential, and you could also see the amount of work that still needed to be done. And Jason was great to work with in that regard, because he was like, at a certain point, he was like, let's cut this back, because you don't need all of this. Like, there's going to be a lot of strength in a little bit less. And it's still a lot, but there was a lot more. And it's good that there's not as much really at this point. The other big thing at the very beginning, when we were sort of plotting out how to make the seasons feel different from each other, there was something that I had in the back of my mind that I kept a secret until I couldn't keep it a secret a lot longer. And I finally had to tell Jason about it. But like, and this is, I think, a really good example of things that as writers, we pick up these little ideas, these little inspirations, something we want to do something with, and we sort of file it away until we find the right place to put it. There's a guy named Malcolm Gladwell, and he has a podcast called Revisionist History. He's also written a lot of books, nonfiction, and I love his stuff. He's fantastic. So if you're at all interested in this, go to the Revisionist History podcast and look for the bonus episode called The Taxonomy of the Modern Mystery Story, which is ridiculous, but it's fantastic. He gave this speech to a convention of mystery writers in New Orleans a couple years ago. And in it, he talks about the 4 ways that law enforcement is portrayed in fiction. And it's about like a 50-minute speech, and I highly recommend it if this is at all interesting. But basically, the 4 things that, the 4 ways that law enforcement are portrayed are sort of like in Murder, She Wrote, sort of like the bumbling sheriff who isn't quite qualified for the job, well-meaning, but everything slips by. You get Wild West, where law enforcement is absent, and it's just kind of like whatever you want to do, you can do, and there's no sheriff around to stop you anyway. You find law enforcement as antagonists, so they're really the villain of the piece, and your heroes have to stop the corrupt cops. Or you find something like Dragnet, where everybody is just really good at their job and they're really good people. And he gives an example in the speech about how in an episode of Dragnet, after they arrested the bad guy, she said, "You know, I'm glad you arrested me because I did wrong and I have to repent." And that's a fantastic example of like, oh, these cops were so good. The bad guys just turn themselves in because they know they're wrong. And so I loved this idea. Yeah, I love this idea of these 4 phases of law enforcement. And for the most part, Brindlewood Bay is kind of focused around the first one, around the Murder, She Wrote scenario, where the sheriff is like well-meaning, depending on your game, trying to get stuff done. Maybe they're not great at it. They're a little unqualified, and that's why they need the book club to solve all the murders. And so I thought, since I have 4 seasons, can I also, in the background, change the Maven's relationship to law enforcement in each season? So that if you do play this over the course of a year, you play the full campaign, you see what's been going on in the background. And you know why Dalrymple at first is kind of the Murder, She Wrote sheriff, like well-meaning, needs help, and like kind of give some reasons for that. Why is he in a particularly bad spot at the beginning of this game? Why is he distracted? Why does he need help? And then something happens, and there is an absence of law enforcement for summer. And then something happens, and law enforcement becomes antagonistic to the Mavens for autumn. And then something happens, and law enforcement is, maybe for the first time in Brindlewood Bay, competent. And the Mavens have to really wonder, do we need to keep doing this? It looks like the police have kind of figured out how to solve murders. Are we needed? And that little adjustment to the player's relationship with law enforcement in these different chunks adds a whole different flavor to the way that they play the game. If they know that if they're found on a murder scene and they're going to be arrested for disturbing evidence, how do you play differently than if there's zero chance that the police are going to show up and there's a dead body right there? So I really liked that, and it took a little while to feed that in and to find all the reasons for it. But that's there. And that, for me, is like a great example of like these things that we pick up in life as writers. And like, what do I do with this? I don't know. And it kind of clicked for this because there were 4 seasons. It seemed easy enough to change it as the whole campaign went on. And it was something different. It was something that we hadn't really seen before in Brindlewood Bay, to try to give players a different experience. I mean, I assume that you're all here in part because you like Brindlewood Bay, because it's a game you like. When we play and we play and we play and we get through all the mysteries, we get through most of the mysteries, except for that one that doesn't really fit with our group, but I kind of wish we could play it, but we're not going to play it, and all that kind of stuff. Then in thinking about what the next campaign is, there's nothing core to it that I think needs to change. It's all this stuff around the edges. So even this example with changing law enforcement over this whole campaign, if you pick Autumn and your group only wants to play the Autumn storyline, you don't have to use any of the police or antagonists' story. You can pull those mysteries out and play them with, the sheriff the way you want to play the sheriff, and all that other stuff that's going on doesn't need to be there. And that's, I think, entirely because of the design of Brindlewood Bay from the beginning. Because we don't need to build this flavor that I'm adding in here is not intrinsic to, there was a murder, these are the suspects, here are the clues, here is the location. And I know that I've run games where I've just like pulled a lot of things out, and like in the context of the campaign we're running, a lot of this stuff that's sort of written in doesn't work. So I've got to pull that out and put in some other things. And I think that that's, for me, that's one of the things that I really love about Brindlewood Bay, is that in a way for me, it's been very customizable and easy to sort of like accommodate where the players want to go and still get to the core of the way the mystery was written that we're in the middle of. So that was all going on in the back of the head. And that's kind of what we've got here. That is what this season, the campaign is going to be. And there's like, I hope I've described a lot of this stuff without really, but at the same time, I'm in just kind of wanting to be concerned about spoilers. If I told you that like one of these mysteries takes place in this location, I don't even know that that's a spoiler anymore, because mysteries can be wherever. But it was this idea of wanting to take what existed and just augment it and add more options as people are beginning to play in different ways, as Carved from Brindlewood really takes off and people are making their own adjustments. The way that the game is designed feels to me like it encourages GMs to almost become more proactive game designers. What can we do with a campaign that you could, on the one hand, just play out of the box with very little adjustments at all, or you can do major creative surgery to it and end up with something perfect for you and your group. And I think as a system, Brindlewood Bay is great for that. And keeping that sort of front of mind as I put this whole thing together, I think it was a really fun creative project. I've written a lot of stuff, and this was really one of the most rewarding pieces to have finished, to get to the end of it and look back on it all and say, like, I think these are really good choices and people are going to like this. And so we just have to wait for that. I don't know. That was the majority of my notes, and it was about a half an hour. So I guess I can answer any questions that you might have about the process of writing this, or ideas, or whatever you like. I'm trying to look at the stuff in the chat and see. But yeah, like anybody can unmute and ask a question if you like. Start a conversation. How long did it take? It took a long time. I actually, my day job is in healthcare, and I dropped to part-time so I would have time to finish writing it. I dropped to part-time, and I probably spent not 20. I probably spent between like 10 to 15 hours a week, just with notebooks, and just like, because at the beginning of it, it was writing so much more, and then it whittled down and whittled down. So it took months and months. And part of that was I did the first big draft of everything, and all those like mysteries were not completed, but it was like, here's the idea, here's how everything fits together. And some of them were almost playable drafts at that stage. And then talking to Jason, we pulled in some of the ideas from some of the other games about connecting campaigns around mysteries and things like that. So as the Jason written Gauntlet games, because we have some a nice pile of very cool games from him right now, and he has talked about this, how like he gets to the next game and is like, oh, I wish I had that material for Brindlewood Bay, and then he writes the next one, he's like, oh, I wish I could backtrack that and put that in there. And I think he like used me and this project as like an opportunity for him to say like, okay, all this stuff that I wish I had done in that first draft, see if you can put it in. Like, oh yeah, okay. So that, which was a great experience, because as a playwright, no one's asked me to really do that for my own plays. But because this was, a contract work, when he says, can you put this structure in there and also cut, 8 mysteries and like figure out a way to do this other stuff, for me, it was just a great creative challenge. And there was never a point where I was like, oh, but if there was a mystery I really didn't want to cut, it was up to me to make it better and to justify keeping it in there. And so if it was only like halfway effective, yeah, get it out, get it gone, get the ones that really work in there and make them even better. So it took a while. It took, I'm not even really sure. It was months and months. It was more than 6 months. And then I went back to full time when I turned in the thing. So it took a while. It did take a while.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you have, since this is the first time really hearing of this, you've made all new cases, all new mysteries that work with this overarching dark conspiracy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So there, it's like I said before, it's sort of like a year in a life. So there are 4 seasons to this year in Brindlewood Bay, and there are 3 mysteries per season, but then there's also that end of the mystery, which we have in the current campaign, where it's sort of like you've now figured everything out, now go stop them. And so each season ends with that. You have learned these things, now what do you do about it? And there's a little more tying it together. but so there are, each season has three new mysteries, and when you play them in the order that is recommended, it grows the mystery of what the midwives are up to in spring or in summer. And then it's like, all right, now you figured it out. Now what do you do? And in theory, if you want to expand any of those seasons, you can take most existing Brindlewood Bay mysteries and stick them between parts 1 and 2. There isn't the same arc through line if you do that, but it is a way for you to sort of expand things. Yeah.
I had a quick question. Was there anything making something like a campaign for Brindlewood Bay and being able to work with this longer time frame than you usually get? Were there any kind of curveballs, things you found didn't work as well on like that larger scale, or things that you like surprise opportunities that you ran into?
Yeah. Let me think about things that didn't quite work. I mean, I talked about like this thing we can fall into where it's like I have this one good idea, but I can't quite pull it off, and that happens. That happens to all of us, and that certainly happened to me a bunch in this. Um, as far as big curveballs that like, I mean the cranberry bog story is a good one because like that was kind of the basis of the whole wraparound mystery for autumn when I started, and when it didn't work, I now didn't have a midwives plan. I didn't have, like, the whole thing fell apart, but I had these individual mysteries. um and so I had to sort of rebuild that whole idea, and that was like, that was major rewriting. There were some, summer was actually kind of like that as well because I had a different, I was really in, initially it was like, oh, here's some beach stuff, here's a lot of summer activities, and then I kind of thought like, how fun is it to play? You know, because we got to keep that in mind as well. And so things like the murder at the sandcastle competition, which I have a whole draft of, and every time I read it I'm like, I don't want to play this. Like, it's like on paper it all works, like all the elements are there, but I'm just not, I'm not, if I'm not interested in running this thing that I've written, why would I assume anybody else wants to run it? So there was like, there was a lot of that stuff. um I think that the big structural stuff about making the year-long campaign work came from integrating these mechanics from other Gauntlet games. And really try. Actually, this is a good one. Trying to figure out what the equivalent of void clues are in this campaign as compared to the existing one. Because you kind of, my first thought was like, well, maybe this is the process we go through. We have bad ideas that we think we can make work. And so like, I think the first idea was like, there were going to be void clues that you needed at the end of the year to figure out what the big plan was, but that there would also be seasonal clues. So there would be void clues just for spring that don't matter when it comes to autumn. And it's like, and I can get into a mode where I make a lot of lists. And I made a lot of lists, and like, it was one of those things where it's just like, this isn't going to work. This is good. Stop making the lists. Stop. It's not going to work. You can add 20 more items and it's still not going to be a good idea. But, so that took a lot of changing. And that might have been the thing that made Jason think, oh, try this other mechanic from this other game and put that in there. So like, there was a lot of changing around of that at a certain point. And I think the way it works now is just much better. Like, first of all, you don't need different types of void clues. I mean, maybe in your game you do. Maybe in your car from Brindlewood it's going to be amazing. I couldn't make it work, but you're going to do it. So that was a big one. That was like, one that definitely went in a couple different directions before scrapping all of that and finding the thing that worked, and then realizing that pulling in these mechanics from other games was the way to go. But now, how do you apply it for Brindlewood Bay in this context? So that took time as well. There was a point where, when it first started, officially I was a writer. I was contracted as a writer. And then at a certain point, when Jason said, "Okay, I'm changing your job title. You're now writer slash game designer. Change whatever rules you need to change." And it was when he started bringing in these other mechanics, and that was kind of a big deal. And I didn't change anything that, the stuff that I changed was to accommodate new mechanics. But like, and that was interesting as well. Like, just having that different title made me feel like, oh, I can touch these things I wasn't touching before. And I was very cautious about it because I love this game. And I didn't, there's no need to make big systemic changes as far as I'm concerned. But like, in trying to bring in these new mechanics, it was like, oh, okay, let's rethink this. Let's like figure out how to apply this. Yeah. Yeah. I think was there a second part to your question? There are things that didn't work.
Were there any like opportunities you found that having that larger time scale allowed you to do?
I think the big one, and I pitched this at the very beginning, because the podcast we do is very, very audio drama like. And like, if you listen to Roll to Meddle, the first couple mysteries are very audio drama like. And to the extent that it was a editing rule that I would take out all out of character conversations. Like, can you just listen to this as an audio drama? And then we got a few mysteries in and we're like, no, everybody here is too funny, and I'm taking out the funny bits when I do that. So for this, I wanted maybe a little more explicit influence for out of mystery in character conversations. So each season, I think I was saying this a little earlier, each season has a little glimpse into the Mavens' lives, like what is going on with them in the autumn that isn't just going to book club. Who are they outside of this? And so things in autumn, there's like, New England has a lot of like old villages. Like, this is like the original Salem structure from 1629 or something like that. And it's like, okay, somebody talked them into dressing up in like period clothing and hanging around at this thing. And like, it doesn't really last, but it's sort of like, if you're playing with the constructs of this being a TV show, there's clues about like, okay, camera fades in, we see our characters dress. Is this 16? Did they travel through time? Oh no, they're a tourist. And like, just giving a little bit of that. And if they love that, if the players love that, they can do more of it, but they don't have to at all. It's just like, that's the kind of thing that I think you would see if this was a mini series. And like, you'd come back on episode 1 of the new season and they're all in period costume and someone talked them into being docents at like, the festival or something, and someone doesn't want to be there and someone loves it too much. And like, right away you get all the possibilities, and that's it. That's all that you need, unless you want more. So like, that for me was a big opportunity, was just to like let people have those opportunities to get in character and just stay in character and be ridiculous and have fun for a while. And then there's a murder, and that kind of thing. So that was important. Yeah, I did that. I liked that. Yeah. How long do I expect this new campaign to take? Thank you. Thank you for coming. It's so right now it's 12 mysteries. If you want to play the whole year, it's 12 mysteries plus, like, at the end of each one, it's like wrap up what you did. So 3 mysteries per chunk. I think And then there's the optional rules of like, and we also want to stick Great British Bake Off in there somewhere or something like that. So if they're like a handful that you love, you can do that, but you don't have to. Um, so I mean, I think if you want to play the whole season, the whole year, that's a good chunk of time. That's like probably like a good. It's probably pretty close to if you take full advantage of the current campaign that's out. It's probably like that. But then in wanting to break this up and do it in smaller chunks, you could also do it like if everybody in your group wants to play this whole thing, but you play a lot of different games, you start with spring and then you play Kids on Bikes and then you come back and you play summer and like and that will work. Like it's designed to take a break and come back to it, and we've caught up with them like 2 months later and hear how some things have changed. So I think that it is flexible in that way.
So when I think earlier you called it a mini series. So when you say that, you aren't saying it's abbreviated in any real way. It's just a different way of constructing and thinking about the campaign.
Yeah, the mysteries are all still formatted the same. It's like all that stuff is the same. Miniseries more like if the original campaign is like a season of Murder, She Wrote. This would be like small chunks of Murder, She Wrote that match sort of like the way a lot of TV is now, rather than the way TV was then. So yeah. So when we think about it as a mini series, it's like here are 3 episodes with a little arc, you know. Yeah, and making sure that it's modular so that each one can stand on its own. But I think you look at it and say, because there's stuff in summer that like points back to spring. It's like, you remember that thing? Uh-huh. And like if you're playing summer without spring, it's still fine. You just don't get that, uh-huh, you remember that? Yeah. It's not an Easter egg, it's just a little thing. So that's fun too, like planting all of that kind of stuff in there, thinking about those. But yeah, I think I think there's more, I think the GM has more control over this for it to take the time that they want it to take. Because if your group is the kind of group that'll play just like one campaign for 5 years, that might be challenging, but you could, like, there is a way to stick in all the episodes, like maybe not all of the other published Brindlewood Bay mysteries, but you could stick a lot of them in here and really expand it. If everyone's just like, throw in everything, we want it all, you can do that. It won't be as tight, but you could do it. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions for anyone?
I think Sam had a couple questions up in the chat.
Oh. Yep.
Sorry, I'm multitasking and my hands are sort of half accessible, but you answered them a little bit, but just, yeah, wondering if there was like a prescribed order. I know that there are these season chunks, but within those, are they prescribed? And also if the players gain access to different moves in the different seasons to kind of reflect this shifting relationship that you're describing.
Yeah. So it was a goal from the beginning to make it as flexible as possible. I wouldn't recommend playing the seasons in a different order. I think you start with spring and then you end with winter. And like, I wouldn't necessarily, if you want to do them all, I would do them in that order. And then the mysteries within a couple of the seasons, the mysteries do want to be in a specific order. Let me think. So like, I was talking a little bit about like the old village. The old village in autumn, something happens and then something happens and then something happens and it kind of builds on itself. But not all the seasons do that. So I think you would look at them and say like, oh, I could maybe switch these two in summer. Like you could do that. But I think autumn probably wants them to be in that order. Initially, I wanted to be able to. I wanted all of the mysteries to be able to be pulled out and just be played by themselves without the context of this. So if it's just like, oh, I just like this one, could I just take this one mystery out of the whole campaign and do that? And there are some where you can do that, but some of them don't make. I mean, you can. We are all creative folk, and we can figure out how to make them work. So there is. There are some of the mysteries that are in locations that make no sense at all unless you know what happened in the mystery before it. And it's like, that is what brought them to this weird place. But I betcha that you could, or someone could, take that weird place and like justify why they're on this ocean platform, out in the bay. Why did they get so, like, it makes sense when you do it in order. It leads into it, but a lot of them can be pulled out and played separately.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I like the idea of a prescribed order, and I'm kind of toying it with it for something I'm working on. So I'm more curious. Yeah, I'm excited to see what you've done with this kind of continually hatching like Russian doll Easter egg of where we're leading to the next location. We're growing this out, deepening into the city of Brindlewood. So very cool.
Yeah, cool. And that is something that about that, when we first started the podcast, it was when the PDF version was out, and I remember emailing Jason, a year before the Kickstarter or something, and just saying like, are there canonical NPCs that I should put in the town? Are there locations? And he was like, nah, do whatever you want to do. And I'm like, okay. And so like, I made choices that like maybe I wouldn't have made if I had seen what was coming in the Kickstarter. But for this, I wanted there to be opportunities, if your game wants to really build out the town. So there are a couple of sequences where, if you want, you can have the characters walk from one building to another building downtown rather than just sort of cut and put them there. And I did some of that early on in spring, in case you're the kind of group that wants to know who's always on that corner near the statue playing guitar. Does that matter for you? Do you really want that immersive town of Brindlewood Bay? Or is that not as important? So there were some of those moments early on in wanting to do that. I'm trying to think about your question about like the moves. And truthfully, I haven't thought about the moves in a while. I think I didn't really. Jason and I had a conversation early on about moves and like whether that was something. I remember what it was. I asked about whether there were tweaks I could make to the character sheet based on moves and that kind of thing. And he came back with like, maybe leave the character sheet alone. So I didn't really do that. Like, so that was an area that he said, you don't need to do that. don't change the character sheets. Do this other stuff. So I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fine. I don't need to change the character sheets. But I'm trying to think.
I guess I was thinking maybe like a Maven move that might get unlocked at a certain point or something that would reflect this, like wherever the relationship stands with the police, or I'm not sure, but I'm just, I'm sure that it's complex enough already. It was just a thought that I had.
Yeah. I don't. And now who knows, because like editing is not finished. So I don't know whether that could still be tweaked. But like when I turned it in, there wasn't really something like that. There was sort of like with the relationships with NPCs and with the law enforcement and stuff like that, there are some pieces of text that's like, here's background information that the GM should know. Here's what's sort of like the things that might happen that the players could find out. And if they really dig, they could find this other stuff. But I don't think we connected moves to any of, well, at least not front of mind. It might turn out that if somebody has a particular move at a particular time, it breaks something. We don't know. I don't know that. I hope not. But that, I guess that's a possibility. Yeah. But I don't think so. No, that's not going to happen. This is pretty perfect the way it is, I think. Yeah. Reoccurring NPCs. That was pretty cool. Yeah. How is the conspiracy different in this one? Okay, so in each season, the midwives are up to something. They have their own smaller conspiracy that is happening right now in this season. And then if you're only playing spring, you won't see how it connects to the rest of the year. But if you do play the entire thing, the conspiracies of each season build. And there is a thing that happens in spring that probably goes unresolved. And so we definitely used I forget the name for it in the game. Basically describing what the camera sees, like scenes that the Mavens are not in. It's like, oh, and then the camera is going to turn on, and we see the creepy cultists in the building doing the thing. And so I did make use of that mechanic, but primarily in tying seasons together. So if you were watching this mini series, you would get this like at the end of spring, it like that post credit scene of like, oh no, I forgot about that. Dun dun dun. And then like you forget about it in summer, it doesn't come up, and then it comes up again in autumn, and you're like, oh yeah, that thing we didn't figure out 6 months ago. It matters. So there is some of that. So that they nest, and by the end you see why the midwives were doing what they were doing in each season. And even though they weren't entirely successful because the players have foiled them, they have not given up, and that has brought them to like the big thing at the end of the year, and like and lots of twists there. Yeah. So it's like it's more like it's basically like that. There are these smaller chunks that lead up to a bigger thing, but they all feed into it and they all matter. So it's not like spring doesn't mean anything by the time you get to autumn or something. Yeah. Is the idea that this is going to be another full Brindlewood Bay book. I know that there were different ideas tossed around about what to do. Because like I think initially it was like, oh, this is part of the Kickstarter and therefore it will just be a PDF. And then there was the possibility of like, oh, maybe it won't be a PDF, maybe it will be... There were a couple of things that they were like, maybe we could do this with it, or maybe we could do this with it. And I actually don't know the current thinking because everything has changed in the last few months. So I don't know. I'm not sure. But I mean, it is a big chunk. It's not as big as like Nephews in Peril or something like that. But it is like, it's a big chunk. It's, it's, the PDF would be, how big would it be? I don't know because of layout and all that kind of thing. But it's sizable because it has all the mysteries in it, and then it has all the background material, and it has all this other stuff in there. So I'm not sure. We'll see how that shakes out.
Just to give like a comparison, because I know this number offhand, Brindlewood Bay comes with 8 mysteries in the core book, so 12 is pretty sizable expansion.
Yeah. 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 I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. A lot of still moving pieces with it. Yeah. I don't know. Any other thoughts? Any other? And it's all changed. Like there was definitely a point where I would say, if anybody has good ideas, definitely go and pitch them to Jason, because he was very open to it when I went in there. And I know now he would probably prefer people not pitch him, just because of him holding everything together at the moment. But he's always been very supportive of the Card from Brindlewood stuff. So that's there may come a point where after this is out that I do something similar to what I did with the unofficial Brindlewood Bay mysteries on Drive Through RPG, where I just take a couple of these things that were good but maybe didn't fit into this, and put them out as a small, here are five mysteries that I have figured out how to make good. Like that one single GM mystery I think is actually pretty good, and it didn't work in this, but I think that could be out there. That's a good 1v1 game, I think. And there are a couple other things that I will at some point probably clean up. There were a couple of mysteries that feel very connected to the seasons. And I might just say something like, hey, if you want to add a 4th mystery into summer, consider this one. If you want to add another mystery into autumn, consider this one. Or do whatever you want with them. So, but that I'll probably do that because some of these are actually pretty good. They just didn't fit into the final piece. So, but I'm going to wait until this is all done before, if I do any of that, I'll do it then. I don't know. Any other thoughts? Any other pitches? Any other cool stuff?
No, not really, but thank you for sharing what you've been working on. I'm excited to read it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for spending an hour or so with me. This is great. I really appreciate it. And this is a really cool week. If you've not been following Amanda's stuff, she's pretty cool, and she has a lot of awesome work out there. And just as a minor spoiler, she does show up on Roll to Meddle at a certain point. So follow her around to all the actual plays. But thank you all very much, and thank you, Chaotic, for running this. This is great.
Right. I'll pause the recording.